Let me see if Josh gives me a heads up. We good to go? All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your patience. There's traffic, there's excitement, there's still students to come. So I'm just going to welcome you all. My name is Jessica Berman. I'm director of the Drescher Center for the Humanities at UMBC. And we are really delighted to be here at the University of Baltimore today in person and, of course, virtually together this afternoon. So today's event is the last event of our Spring 2024 Humanities Forum, which is a free public lecture series organized by the Drescher Center for the Humanities at UMBC, and today held in partnership with the University of Baltimore and especially the History Department here. So I just want to say thank you to be in this great space with you all in Baltimore. I just also want to add that I hope this is only the first of many partnerships to come, and very exciting to be here on another campus in Baltimore City. I also want to thank our other sponsors from UMBC, the Department of American Studies, the Orser Center for the Study of Place, Community, and Culture, the Public Humanities Program, and the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Public Health. So planning is already underway for our fall series of talks, and we hope many of you can join us. Even if you've never been to UMBC, you're very, very welcome. We'll help you get there. And in particular, we're hoping to host a celebration of James Baldwin on the 100th anniversary of his birth, which is this year, 2024. So hopefully in the fall, stay tuned for more news on that. And information will be posted on the Drescher Center website, dreschercenter.umbc.edu. And before we begin, I want to make some announcements. First, I want to acknowledge that we stand on the land of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples. Over time, citizens of many more indigenous nations have come to reside in this region. We humbly offer our respects to all past, present, and future indigenous people connected to this place. And while we recognize the importance of acknowledging those who came before us, we also know that this is only a small gesture and we must take action towards the necessary work of repair. Next, just to let you know, this afternoon's event is being recorded and will be made available online a few days after the talk. And then if you'll just bear with me for a few more minutes, I'd like to say a couple more words. As some of you know, I'll be stepping down from the directorship of UMBC's Drescher Center this summer and passing it along into the able hands of history professor Amy Freud at UMBC. And I just want to say it's truly been a supreme pleasure to support and promote the amazing humanities work going on at UMBC and elsewhere, like at U Baltimore, and to work with so many colleagues to help showcase the power of the humanities to address our most pressing social concerns today, as this talk will very clearly show you. I give heartfelt thanks to those who have been part of the Drescher Center team over the years, but especially to Courtney Hobson, our manager, sitting in the front row. He is the mastermind behind the Humanities Forum and also the person who makes it work, and for also so much other programming in the center. So Courtney, yeah. It has taken hard shared work to grow the center into the strong institution it has become, connecting scholars and students across disciplines, offering a home for scholars working at the forefront of their fields, and helping to build a strong humanities community of practice, both on and off the UMBC campus. And as I said, today's talk is a great example of where that leads, not only to the partnership with the University of Baltimore and Josh Davis for this talk, but also to the powerful shared work in Baltimore that so many of you on both campuses and in the wider community are doing. I'm really grateful to you all, but especially to Professor Nicole King of the American Studies Department at UniverCities for teaching me so much about what the public humanities can and should be. Over the past 10 years, you really brought me along, Nicole, and for allowing me to be a little part of it. I'm really proud of the center's role in supporting this kind of work, and I thank you all for that gift. So now I just want to bring to the stage Josh Clark Davis, Associate Professor in University of Baltimore's Division of Legal, Ethical, and Historical Studies, who will now come up and introduce our speaker.
Hey everyone, welcome. We're gonna have to do it like the movie theaters. You have to turn the cell phone off, the ringer, all of that. Most important announcements first. There's free food after this event. And welcome to our friends and colleagues from UMBC and from other schools from this area. I just want to really encourage everyone who's here from the University of Baltimore to, talk to some of our new visitors from UMBC who are here during the reception. I know some of you went to the Baltimore Panthers exhibit recently and met a lot of those Hopkins students. And yeah, that kind of thing is good, where we're meeting different campuses here. I wanted to do a few quick introductions so we can get the show on the road. But, oh, I forgot my props too. Okay, so thank you, Professor Berman, for that introduction. Thank you all for making the trip here and navigating that traffic. I was going to say thank you to the Drescher Center for the Humanities for really making this happen, for us collaborating together. I wanted to say thank you to the American Studies Department at UMBC, especially to Professor Nicole King. I wanted to thank Courtney Hobson again, who really made so many of these details come together. I wanted to thank our history students, history club officers, Sandra Ernst and Annie Allen, who've really been working on this side. And yeah. The Orser Center, which we'll hear more about today, I think, also. So quick introductions, maybe not that quick, but Professor Nicole King is an associate professor of the Department of American Studies, an affiliate professor in the Language, Literacy, and Culture program, and the director of the Orser Center for the Study of Place, Community, and Culture at UMBC. She got her PhD in American Studies from the University of Maryland, College Park. She is the author of a book called Sombreros and Motorcycles in a Newer South. Also, the editor of this book, Baltimore Revisited, which, to confess, myself and Dr. Kate Drabinski over here are the other two editors. Professor King was kind of the brave general who really started this, saw it through the end. I kind of came in as like a relief pitcher in a sense. But there are multiple people in this room, I think, who wrote articles in this book. In our History of Baltimore class that I'm teaching in the fall, we read the introduction. So that's a course available to people if they're registering already, which hopefully they are. I'm going to say a few other things. Professor King has basically been working at the heart of what we call public humanities. And one of the biggest achievements was getting an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation grant that she and Dean Kimberly Moffett got in 2020 to establish what they called the Baltimore Field School. Basically, this is seeking to enhance the understanding and visibility of communities in South and Southwest Baltimore in the city, and really do this through community partnership and to create a model of what we call effective ethical humanities research, teaching, and learning in Baltimore and about Baltimore and in cities like Baltimore. And this field school has been doing events basically nonstop since 2020. Lots of public events, very good ones to watch out for. And I was going to add something in particular. There's a lot of academics who talk about being activists, right? And Professor King really is doing the real political work out there in the city. If you watch for her. Just one example, if you know the neighborhood called Poppleton, which is in Southwest Baltimore, which has been really endangered, embattled because of a major development that is being built there by out-of-town developers. It's been in the works for 20 years. There was one family in particular, Sonia Edie's family, that challenged the developer and the city to not force all of the people to move out of that community. And a lot of people were forced to move, but very late in this process, finally the city, and I hope I'm summarizing this correctly, but a lot because of the work that Ms. Edie and the Edie family and Professor King and other people were doing, they got something amazing to happen, which is to get the city to admit it made a mistake, which doesn't really happen a lot in Baltimore. Probably not most cities, but not in Baltimore. And the Edie family has been able to stay in that home, and not just that family, but to really kind of start a bigger conversation in our city about development and gentrification and pushing the city to be more responsible and not facilitating these things necessarily in a way that hurts communities. Okay, and she's doing great work. She's a really good colleague and a good friend, and so I'm really glad that she's here tonight. I also wanted to welcome Professor Davarian Baldwin, who came here all the way from Springfield, Massachusetts, right, where he lives, although he teaches at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He's an internationally recognized scholar, author, public advocate. He's the Paul E. Raether Distinguished Professor of American Studies and the founding director of the Smart Cities Research Lab at Trinity College. His academic and political commitments have focused on global cities, especially diverse and marginalized communities that struggle to maintain sustainable lives in urban locales. He is also doing a lot of political work on the ground in different cities and is an incredibly politically engaged professor who is not just staying in his office, writing, researching, avoiding people like some academics do, but actually seeking them out. Okay, he's the award-winning author of several books, most recently In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities. That's what we're going to be hearing about tonight. By the way, the book is for sale out at that table. It's a great book, and it's being sold by Greedy Reads, local bookseller. And The Jigsaw Puzzle. And you don't meet many scholars who can claim, I created a jigsaw puzzle, helped to create one. It's The World of the Harlem Renaissance, a jigsaw puzzle. Came out in 2022. His commentaries and opinions have been featured in numerous outlets. NBC News, the BBC, Hulu, USA Today, Washington Post, Time Magazine. A really big feather in his cap in 2022 was being named part of the, I think, inaugural class of Freedom Scholars by the Margaret Casey Foundation, which, aren't they based here in Baltimore? That's Seattle. Okay, I'm confusing them with another Casey Foundation. So I was also going to say that I brought one other prop, which is Professor Baldwin's first book, which is Chicago's New Negroes, Modernity, the Great Migration, and Black Urban Life. When I was in grad school, we were reading this in class, and this was the hot new, you know what, and we were reading this, and it was a really nice example of a very young scholar writing about popular culture and taking it really seriously. And I was in grad school and kind of taking cues from what he was doing. And I was thinking before you came, we've kind of been crossing paths for a while now, going back over a decade, like at the German Historical Institute and then the panel. But I was thinking, when did I meet Professor Baldwin? And it was all the way back, this is going to date us some, but it was this conference at UNC where I went to grad school, Beyond Blackface. I had to look it up. The website looked old. That's how old it was. And it was a conference in 2007. The only thing I'll share is that when you are new to a field, whether you're in graduate school or law school, or you're new to a job, it can be extremely intimidating being in professional spaces, right? And seeing how the grownups act and interact and play, and you don't always get brought into those spaces. Like someone has to bring you in. And I remember being one of those kind of nervous grad students, and this new young professor came to this conference, and you cut a profile then as you do now. Like I remember it was a much older crowd except for you. And what I really remember is in the reception afterwards, Professor Baldwin was the most down-to-earth person there. And he wasn't trying to seek out, oh, who's the most powerful professor here or there. I need to talk to this person and make sure this person gets me this thing published. He was seeking out the grad students and just saying, so who are you? What do you do? Good to see you. Nice to meet you. That sticks with you when you are in that kind of space and you don't know how to navigate it years later. So thank you for that, and for generally being on that level of open to talk to whoever, whenever, wherever. I'm going to end it at that. Okay. And I think let Professor King come up and take over the show. Yep.
Good evening. Thanks to all of y'all for showing up. And thanks so much to Josh and the University of Baltimore and the History Club and all the students that helped put this together. And you're lucky to have a professor who cares so much about history and so much about his students. Also, you know, we've thanked them, but we can't thank Jessica and Courtney from the Drescher Center enough for what they do and the amazing people that they bring to our campus and to our city. So thank you. I really hope this is the beginning of many cross-institutional collaborations in Baltimore, because we all have to work together across institutions to do the work that we need to do that our speaker is going to talk about. So tonight's talk honors the work of Ed Orser. Ed Orser was a beloved professor in the Department of American Studies at UMBC for over 40 years. Ed passed away in January of this year. Upon his retirement in 2010, the Orser Center for the Study of Place, Community, and Culture was established in Ed's honor at UMBC. It works to foster innovative collaborations among scholars, students, and local community organizations, exploring place-based research, especially focused on the Baltimore region. Ed's work as a publicly engaged scholar was an inspiration for our minor in public humanities, which Dr. Sarah Fouts directs, who is here. Ed's examination of the phenomenon of massive racial change in West Baltimore during the 1950s and 1960s led to the first book-length study of blockbusting and its consequences in post-World War II cities. Blockbusting in Baltimore, the Edmondson Village Story. It was published in 1997. But it remains an influential text and is still cited in scholarship on Baltimore and cities like it. Ed influenced generations of students and mentored many faculty members. His kindness, humility, and generosity are greatly missed in the Department of American Studies, across the UMBC campus, and in the Baltimore community. So we have a lot of work to do at this moment at our university campuses. They are at the forefront for public debates concerning freedom of speech, social justice, and building a more equitable future. Our young people, and I want every student to stand up right now, every young person who is a student, stand up if you're a student, stand up. That's why we're here. That's why we do what we do. All right, all of you guys, thank you. Thank you for showing up. Our young people, y'all lead the way. We follow you. Students are organizing Palestinian solidarity protests against war and genocide right now at universities across this nation, including here in Baltimore. Many of those protests are in cities where universities have not only become agents of gentrification, but where university leadership is calling in the police to arrest their own students for peaceful protest. We need to stand in support with these students. And the work of Davarian Baldwin, our speaker this evening, not only provides a history and an analysis of how we got here, but also the potential for infrastructures of possibility where we can build better universities, better futures, better societies. We need to stand up against the settler colonial displacement and erasure of people from the land here in Baltimore and across the globe. Those struggles are united. So this afternoon, I walked with our speaker through the University of Maryland, Baltimore BioPark campus, west side of downtown, and across MLK Boulevard, one of the many racial dividing lines in our city. Now, the University of Maryland, Baltimore BioPark crossed that highway in 2004 as part of an empowerment zone and a lot of neoliberal investment of public funds in private developments. The following year, in 2005, the city of Baltimore awarded a group of connected Black developers from New York City the rights to develop 14-acre parcel of vacant land, in their words, in the Poppleton neighborhood of West Baltimore. Except the land was not vacant. 132 homes, 132 families, many of them I know personally, were occupying those spaces. So the real crime, and it is a crime, was that the city used its powers of eminent domain, the ability to take private property for public use, to displace hundreds of working class Black families, to demolish their homes, and to build primarily market rate housing for the BioPark workers who were supposed to flood the area. And this was somehow going to save the city. This is 2005. That influx did not happen, y'all, and neither did most of the development, which has held the neighborhood in a state of limbo for nearly 20 years. We couldn't find a bit of shade walking through there. It was hot. This long cycle of displacement, disinvestment, and demolition, coupled without any meaningful development in Poppleton and neighborhoods like it, is a form of redevelopment as slow violence, but one resisted by generations of residents who have fought and are still fighting to preserve their homes, their community assets, their neighborhoods, their futures, our futures. Residents have endured broken promises and the slow violence of extractive redevelopment projects that were by design, not for or with them, for decades. Developers will not save this city. Residents will. From the massive, and one of them just walked in, hey, Sonia Edie. Yeah, round of applause for Mrs. Edie's work. So residents are the future of the city. From the massive displacement and redevelopment of projects that Johns Hopkins has done over east, to the expansion of UMB BioPark over west, universities have worked as massive real estate developers, but guess what, y'all? They only pay a modicum of the taxes that they're owed. Pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, currently allow the 15 hospitals and university in Baltimore to collectively pay, that's collectively only 6 million of the almost 120 million that they owe. Also, TIFs, tax increment financing, a mechanism only allowed in Baltimore since 2000, are now handed out like candy to wealthy outside developers in the city. We need to radically change the way this city works, the way that cities work. The current With Us, For Us Community Wealth Building Coalition, some of the folks seated right over here who have organized with me in Poppleton and who are amazing, are out there collecting signatures. If you live in Baltimore City, please talk to them, please sign, but also start getting signatures from your neighbors and your friends and starting conversations. So we're doing that work. And Davarian Baldwin's groundbreaking work not only unearths how universities became the friendly face of urban renewal projects that destroyed and displaced Black communities, but also what we can do about it. Y'all, he is an inspiration in urban history and American studies for the work that I am trying to help us build in Baltimore with you all. So just please join me in welcoming Davarian Baldwin to Baltimore and to UniverCities.
Good evening. Good evening. All right. Thank you. It is not just wonderful to be here, but an honor, a privilege to be here, a blessing to be here. I've been to Baltimore many times, but I never learned so much in the afternoon, the brief afternoon that I spent time with Professor King. And I just want to always give respect due before I say anything of relevance or half brilliance. But I want to thank the Drescher Center. I want to thank the Orser Center. I want to thank Jessica and Courtney for their unending support to make this whole process facilitate in a seamless, stress-free way. Thank you. I want to thank Courtney for supporting the puzzle, right? As an assembler herself. I also want to thank Professor Davis and King for bringing Baltimore City's educational world together to have this conversation, because we know that our leadership class meets together. It's time that we do the same. It's time that we build out the university in the spaces that we want to have, because this work is being done. The prosperity of these building cranes that we see all over the city under campuses is being done in our names, with our money, at our cost. So it's time that we have an actual say in that process by cutting across boundaries to build out not just the university, but the democracy that we deserve, especially as these institutions become the primary political and economic beachhead in today's political economy. It is a vital, vital battle of struggle. No more clear than what's going on these campuses around the story of Gaza and Palestine more broadly. It's bringing together the local and the global in ways that we knew, but maybe couldn't clearly visualize. It means something that our police are trained by the IDF. It means something that the donor class that dictate curriculum and building projects on our campuses are also Zionists. It means something that conversations around freedom of speech, academic freedom, only work for everyone except for what we call the Palestinian exception. And how the Palestinian exception works not just in Gaza, but also here on our campuses, where those who either support or are identifiable as Muslim or Arab or Palestinian are doxxed, surveilled, sprayed with chemical agents, evicted, surveilled on an endless basis. So never have I ever wanted my work to be this prophetic. But here we are. Here we are. Ending the linkages between gentrification, settler colonialism, and either our role or our function within this local and global network of power. We cannot leave here without bearing witness to the connections between these worlds that are seemingly disparate, but are so intimately connected. So I want to give props to and dedicate this talk to the decades, not just the weeks, the decades, at least since '68. But going forward to Occupy and BLM and the last few weeks of encampments, the decades of agitation, protest, and settlement instigated by a collection of students, residents, and finally kicking and screaming, dragged, some faculty, now converging on our campuses across the globe. These encampments, teach-ins, these popular people's universities shed light on the simultaneity of university power and acting as a repressive parastate for these local campuses to Gaza and across the world. We say no to the anti-woke and anti-CRT politics, no to university-driven gentrification, no to the militarized suppression of free speech and freedom of assembly, and no to scholasticide, the literal bombing and destruction of all institutions of learning throughout Gaza Strip. We say free the campus, free the block, free Palestine, free the world. So what does this mean for Baltimore? What is the Baltimore story? You ready? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Be with me, bear presence, bear witness. The University of Maryland is taking over West Baltimore, and Johns Hopkins is taking over East Baltimore. And that's just how it is. They unstoppable. Thank you to Nicole for this reference point from a Baltimore resident, from Word on the Street, from the Downtown Voices podcast in 2016. As you can see, this image is it sits on top of the long overlay of the black butterfly that makes university extraction and governance and dominance over East and West possible. It's these overlapping layers of racial capitalism, of authoritarian rule, that make and allow for this new iteration of the political economy with higher education, or the eds and meds, at the center of the story possible. As I like to say, the Ivy Tower is dead. These are not just these elite, out of touch institutes. They'll tell you that. Our enemies will tell you that. They're out of touch. They are the most profound movers and shakers, developers and power brokers in today's economy, hiding behind the veneer of just being a school. We need to understand that. We need to bear witness to that, and we need to organize against that. East Baltimore. In the 2000s, Johns Hopkins and the city of Baltimore joined forces to create the East Baltimore Development Corporation Initiative, and take control of 80 acres of city land. This partnership invoked the power of eminent domain, sound familiar? Invoked the power of eminent domain to displace approximately 740 Black families in Middle East to make way for a mixed-use biotechnology campus that has been renamed UniverCities. Hopkins officials appoint to the construction jobs made available to residents and the hefty housing subsidy of $36,000 for some of the school's employees to resettle in new townhomes on the development site. But one professor told me that the housing program, quote, represents one of the signal examples of how gentrification is packaged at Hopkins, end quote. The subsidy for housing underwrites inflated housing costs for its employees in the new development, but at prices above the means of previous residents. At the same time, subsidies are not accessible to lower wage workers employed by university subcontractors like Broadway services. So therefore, former residents have found few pathways of return to their original neighborhoods, despite all the promises that this would be an inevitability. It's not. That's the East. To the West, I feel like I don't need to say this already. Professor King, basically, I could have stopped right here, right? But just to reiterate, to the West, we have in 2004 the groundbreaking for the BioPark. Talked about as if it's the new frontier of the West, a manifest destiny. We crossed the line. We have crossed MLK. We are in the wilderness. We gonna save the city. Poppleton urban planning amended allowing use of eminent domain to take 526 properties on 13.8 acres of vacant land for the so-called university knowledge workers to come. If you build it, they will come. Well, they haven't come. 2005, Save Our Block. Miss Edie's in the building. Had the pleasure speaking with her at lunch with Miss Edie and Miss Mills. Telling these stories to me, confirming, bearing witness to the reality of these ideas, of the data points, giving human scale, skin and bone and sinew to these simple data points, showing me how it's not just relocation, but it's the root shot of trauma, of being disrupted and displaced from your home that you've known all along. If Ms. Mills has a daycare out of her home, being relocated, making her shut down her daycare center, moving her into a neighborhood where she can never recoup that base for her well-being, having to find a low-wage service job to make ends meet, and being told this is a gift, the trauma, the lack of care, the harm, the callousness of relocation. City of Baltimore signs contract with La Cité, right? Always an accent. To develop the so-called vacant land. Moving forward between 2005 and 2017, for those 7 years, nothing develops for years, but demolition and displacement continues. The sound of bulldozers become a regular occurrence, the soundtrack for Poppleton life. Move forward to 2023, just last year, Angela Banks files complaint about targeted displacement of Black residents as a violation of the Fair Housing Act. In this tale of East and West, we see something uniquely Baltimore. But at the same time, Baltimore has become the powerful ground zero for a much larger transformation, a confirmation of what I've been talking about for the last 20 years. In Baltimore, we see a national story of higher education's growing control over the economic development and political governance across urban America, or what I have termed UniverCities. Now, to be sure, colleges and universities can bring ideas and people together and generate new, and you're gonna hear this word over and over again, and you probably already have, create new innovations. Stay with me. Innovations, right? This kind of chalice and unknown magical concept that prosperity and possibility just follows with the mention of the word. Say with me. Innovations. That it speaks for itself. It doesn't. The idea is that the presence of higher education, the meds and eds, their very presence can make cities and towns more vibrant places to work, visit, and live. And that is a possibility if it weren't for the ways in which these developments are manipulated to meet the ends and needs of neoliberal capitalism and its racial overlay. In reality, besides the ideas, higher education has become big business, and across the country, our cities have become their company towns. But there is a collective cost for those living in the shadows of these ivory towers. Number one, campus expansions also raise housing costs and displace residents. Number two, higher education's broad control over labor can lower wage ceilings and suppress collective bargaining efforts across the city. Number three, nonprofit university medical centers emphasize profitable boutique services and high-profile research to the detriment of the indigent care that nonprofit medical centers are required to offer in exchange for their unique tax exemption. Required. And yet you can't find them on the website. You can't find them in an outreach program. In fact, it was the Mighty Nurses Union in Baltimore at Hopkins that shed a light that instead of making visible the required services in exchange for the tax exemption, what did Hopkins Medical do? They pursued liens on the homes of those who were being charged market rate medical services. They could do that because most of their clients also worked in the low wage, janitorial, grounds crew, cafeteria workers at Hopkins Medical or on the main campus. This is why they could also, if the market rate charges weren't paid, they could also, and they did, pursue liens on their homes and garnish their checks. This is what I mean by UniverCities. And finally, number four, this wealth that is being converged and seeded on this campus grounds are surrounded by campus police forces, Hopkins again, and University of Maryland, that survey and profile the same residents and are rarely held to public account. You still with me? Sound familiar? This is a national story. Even if schools don't hold all this power, but your schools do, we are witnessing greater swaths of our cities being turned into a campus with devastating effect. So, as Professor King offered, how did we get here? Now, I can go back. We ain't got much time, so we're just gonna go some recent history. If you want to ask me about the older history, we can do that in the Q&A. Let's just go back. For some of you young folks, this is ancient history. For me, I was in college. We're gonna go back to the 90s. In the 1990s, we find a history of convergence. During the period of the 1990s, after decades of white flight, capital divestment, the overbuilding of suburban peripheries, we begin to witness a back to the city movement. People were bored of, sitting outside the parking lot at 7-Eleven, living in a tract house that was the very same as the one next to it, and the one next to it, and the one a mile away. We started to see a back to the city movement, a desire to get back into this. I lived this. I was a grad student that went to New York City in 1995. Amidst this back to the city movement, when Giuliani was the mayor of New York City, kicking out people from ATM vestibules, arresting people for spending too much time in an ATM vestibule, clearing medical facilities and turning them into high-end, high-rise housing, right? Arresting people for taking up more than one seat on the train. Quality of life crimes, they called it. Seeding and clearing ground to make way for young professionals and empty nesters who want to come back into the city. So what's going on one side, you have cities that are trying to compete for the tax base of these returnees, these people that want the city life. On the other side, you have colleges and universities that are facing reduced state contributions to higher education, trying to figure out ways to become more entrepreneurial. How are we gonna get money when the state's not contributing as much as they used to? Both public and private schools, don't get it twisted. They all get public money. So what we have here is a period and point of convergence between the ambitions of cities competing for these empty nesters and young professionals. They want to stay in the city to build up the tax base. And on the other side, universities who are looking for other revenue streams to compensate for their losses. The interests converged in what would it mean to turn the city into a campus as a mode of value capture. That what did empty nesters and professionals from the suburbs think when they thought about city life? Walkability, fully wired, riverfront development, museums, coffee shops. So in their mind, what was the ideal image of urban life? A campus. And universities jumped on that as a way to capture the revenue that would come not just with students, but construction contracts, food service contracts, the related housing, Center West. Turning cities into campuses becomes this powerful mechanism of value capture, both for the cities and for the university partners and their third-party developers, Wexford, General Motors, Google, IBM, Moderna, Pfizer, Eli Lilly. We'll get to that in a minute. So we have this history of convergence where what we call politely in the nonprofit world, anchor institutions, those institutions like medical centers and universities that were too big to leave, and believe me, they all tried to leave during white flight. Too big to leave, they said, oh, we're gonna rebrand. We are anchor institutes. We're gonna serve as the economic engines of the post or de-industrial, Okay. Hey, it is what it is. We keep working. Of the de-industrial economy. It's all good. So Ivory Towers, yeah, come on. Somebody trying to stop me from getting my mode going, right? They just don't know me that well. Speaking too much truth.
Everything is plugged in. I might call the IT.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I do hand puppets.
Let's see. Slide. Still not doing it, is it?
Okay. Here we go. Hey, all right, thank you. Yes. Okay, I'm not sure how to keep it going, but we're gonna hurry up. Okay, so this was actually the language in the literature of city boosters, that the Ivory Towers would become the new smokestacks, the economic revival of the city, right? That was the actual, so I'm not making this up. This is the point of being a good historian. We get the receipts. Right? This is actual language in the literature on anchor institutions, the new smokestacks. So at the same time, we are recognizing that heavy industry is moving to the global south. That the new engine of the economy at the same time that universal income revenue streams is knowledge. What do I mean by that? So knowledge became the new face of capitalism, turning our so-called Ivory Towers into profit universities. What do we mean by the rise of the knowledge economy? Well, here, academic research, and this is why we have biotech parks all over the place. In the knowledge economy, academic research is used to create profitable commercial goods or patents in a range of fields, from pharmaceuticals and software products to health services, and yes, military industrial weaponry. This is the new economy all across cities and towns. This is why everybody wants to build out these research parks, these biotech corridors, and they need to be affiliated with universities for the cheap labor and for the tax abatements that come with being on an educational space. This is all profit orientation in the name of just being an educational institution. This is pimping. This is gain. So you want to build these knowledge communities for research and retail and housing in the middle of areas that would previously be understood as dangerous. How you gonna build a BioPark in Pop? How you gonna build Eager Park in Middle East after decades of saying, these are no-go zones, right? How you gonna get researchers and students and their families to come down and build out and stay and do the work at a reduced cost as an apprentice, graduate students, right? Which means basically free labor. So how you gonna do that? So key to recruiting the best students, faculty, and their families to these seemingly no-go zones is creating an urbane cluster. This is Philly, an urbane cluster of housing, retail, and nightlife. These variously called innovation districts or urban research parks, or Baltimore's own Wexford, what they call knowledge communities. Sit right in the middle of existing neighborhoods of color that surround or are adjacent to expanding campuses, where the land is relatively cheap and the political power most vulnerable. And I've seen these developments all across the country, and now increasingly the world. Just got back from the Netherlands, doing work there as well. It's global. So the University of Cincinnati's, what do you think is the next word? Innovation corridor. Cortex in St. Louis. The biomedical campus innovation center in Phoenix. West Philadelphia's U City Square. Innovation quarter in Winston-Salem, Miami Converge in South Florida, the Innovation Center in the newly anointed Innovation and Design District in Providence, Rhode Island. The campus has become, and to be clear, these are all developments created by Baltimore's own Wexford Science and Technology. I'll tell you why in a minute. The campus has become a vital planning mechanism to build out UniverCities by retrofitting neighborhood blocks to maximize wealth extraction based on land control, labor management, and the privatization of governance. Because of these dynamics, now both citizens and politicians are starting to look around and say, wait a minute, what makes higher education actually good for the public? These community benefits that never happen. These relocation grants and money that we had to, that Ms. Mills had to sign over and never got to see the money. These land trusts that never come online. The community spaces in Center West that is about as big as this area here, this green space, is the community space. These are the promises of serving the public good. So people are, well, wait a minute. After decades of intentional divestment, you want me to be happy with whatever you give me, except whatever you offer me. I should be happy you want to invest here. But it's because there's a profit calculation. Previously divested areas, because of a history of racially organized redlining, make these areas lucrative for these developers. It ain't no gift, not a favor. It's a benefit to be what we used to call back in the hood, black gold, right? Suppressing black value and work as a way of being able to get this land and this labor below cost and call it a gift. The same hustle is going on right now, all in the name of serving the public good. So thinking about land, labor, and policing in the form of governance, or governance in the form of policing, we ask the question, what good is higher education for our cities like Baltimore? Let's start with land. Off the top, we presume that schools are an inherent public good, most clearly marked by their 501c3 property tax exempt status. The idea here is that because schools provide something that the state would have to provide, education, that we're going to give them property tax exempt status for offering that thing. But what's happening with schools, both public and private? State schools are bringing in more out-of-state students than in-state students, right? At a higher cost. Private schools don't even think about local residents. How many Baltimore residents go to Hopkins? Right? Yet their tax exemption comes from the state under the agreement that they would serve the local public good. Both public and private schools only exist because of a state charter. We could revoke the state charter if they're not actually investing in the local public good as designated by the state in terms of access, use of campuses, cost. All these things should be on the referendum of, are you actually serving the public good that brings you into existence through your charter and signals your property tax exemption as a 501c3? These questions should all be up for a referendum, for discussion. So even though that's not the conversation, just stay with me for a minute and think about this thing that I'm calling the public good paradox. Because it's precisely this nonprofit designation, this 501c3 property tax designation, is what allows for an easier transfer of public dollars into higher education's private or self-interested developments with little public scrutiny. So the very state or tax code designation as an educational institution functions as a financial shelter. This is the hustle. You still with me? So these schools, but especially state schools, pay virtually no taxes on their increasing physical footprint, yet they reap the benefits of city services, while residential property taxes and rental property costs rise and public facilities are underfunded. Case in point, in 2016, the New Jersey neighborhood of Witherspoon-Jackson won an $18 million lawsuit against Princeton. Why? Because they realized that their these are Black homeowners, their taxes were going up, yet their public facilities were not being improved. As young folks say, the math wouldn't math. Right? How are taxes gonna go up, but there is no actual infrastructural improvement? Because these neighborhoods, these homes sat next to Princeton University buildings. And they realized that these Princeton buildings had research laboratories that were conducting R&D for the multinational pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly. What did this mean in the balance sheet? This meant that Eli Lilly could contribute a significant amount of money to Princeton, called a tax write-off for educational purposes. Princeton could use that money to pay below market rate for the PI and the grad students who were apprentices, not market rate employees, and then take a big chunk of that money and put it in the amorphous category of overhead costs. So this arrangement benefits the third, and then the work is done on tax-exempt properties that will then underwrite the wealth of Eli Lilly. So this arrangement, this public-private partnership benefits Eli Lilly, it benefits Princeton, but what about the residents? The cost is being passed on to them in the form of higher property taxes and deferred improvement of the public facilities, public infrastructure. So when these seniors, most of them are seniors, and seniors got time, they did the research and they found out about this calculation and they sued Princeton University and won an $18 million tax relief lawsuit in 2016. One resident was so disgusted by what he discovered, he dismissed Princeton University as a hedge fund that conducts classes. Lest you think this is just the leafy green ivies that do such things. Let's go west. Arizona State University. As a public university, Arizona State leases its tax-exempt land to the highest bidder. This is State Farm Insurance Regional Headquarters in Arizona. It's the biggest private development in the state. It is tax-exempt because it sits on Arizona State University land. Why does this matter? Because the university then transfers its tax exemption to this private development. It then charges the development a slightly lower annual fee. Then it uses that fee to pay for things like the NFL level football salary of the former football coach Herm Edwards. He's the coach for the New York Jets, and can build out private football stadiums, retirement communities without the oversight of the state legislature. This is a state university. This is the hustle. So public and private schools. This is how educational institutions becomes a hustle in the tax code. This is why we're saying with us, for us. Labor, workers in the knowledge economy, knowledge communities. We know that right now we think about, elbow, tweed jackets and elbow patches, the overstimulated and well-fed tenure track faculty, right? the tenured radicals, the wokists, the wokums, whatever the word is today. I know it keeps changing. It makes some shit up, right? The wokists, right? That they're overfed, overstimulated, out of touch. The reality is that 70% of university instructors are adjunct workers, glorified gig workers, contingent laborers. But while that might be the most visible story in higher education, the bigger story is the legions of largely Black and brown and largely women low-wage workers that make these campuses go. The grounds crew, the cafeteria, the janitorial, the physician's assistants, the admin. They are the ones that make these campuses go. And because universities are notoriously anti-union, because universities are the biggest employers, like Hopkins, in the city, when they suppress organized labor, they create lower wage ceilings, not just for Hopkins, but for the entire city. So I spoke with a janitor at Hopkins, and she told me, this is not just her story, but low-wage workers at universities in Baltimore can be working full-time and are still eligible for public assistance. Full-time workers at a university, still eligible for public assistance. Why? Because they're placed on furlough in the summertime when students aren't there. And then on top of that, when they do engage in collective bargaining, the university shifts to subcontractors. So you have a guaranteed contract with those who are directly employed, but then increasingly more and more of the workers are not covered because they're covered or governed by a subcontractual relationship. This is what happened with the housing subsidies in Eagle Park. It was white and lower middle class campus workers that were directly employed. It was Black and brown working poor workers that were subcontracted by places like Broadway Services. That's the hustle. Finally, and you know this area well, policing. Most schools have campus police, 75%. I'm not talking about Barney Fife, sleepy public safety folks. I'm talking about campus police departments, licensed, 75%. Nearly all carry guns. And about 9 in 10 have jurisdictional power beyond the main campus. The power to police non-university affiliates. Now, how does this even happen? The idea is that, well, hell, this campus is in East Baltimore. This campus is in Poppleton. This is a public service. When Baltimore PD can't get there, we can come in and help out. We're doing a good thing, right? That this policing is marketed as an agent of student or community safety. But just think about this. Let's just use some common sense for a minute. Like this, we all can do that for a minute, right? So if we're going to expand the powers of campus police, we would assume that we would do that because they're doing a good job of policing campuses, which is their primary job, right? Would you think that? Why would you extend the power of the police force unless they were doing a good job in their primary function, right? That would make common sense, right? I mean, can we agree on that? That would make common sense? You aren't going to expand the powers of somebody doing a bad job, unless it's Donald Trump or someone of that nature, right? Or the U.S. military. But let's just bear with me for a minute. So, what's the primary policing job of campus police? To police the campus. What are the biggest crimes on campus? Sexual violence, substance abuse, petty crime. Campus police do a horrible job of dealing with any of these campus infractions. And yet they don't police the crimes on campus, yet their presence is overwhelming where? All around the campus. Some people say, wait a minute, this just means we need more police. Hopkins, But what it says to me and others is that this is by design, to under-police, to create criminal amnesty for the primarily white-on-white crimes on campus, and to over-police the perception of crime off campus. This is by design, because what university wants to advertise that it has a campus full of white criminals? Period, right? As young people say, pause, right? And yet they need to signal to investors, families, and students that what? The areas all around the campus are safe. This is not unintentional. This is not accidental. This is by design. Campus police, as we see today, have never been about public safety. It is about brand management and power maintenance. It has never been more clear than today. In response to peaceful protests, bringing in militarized force to make sure that these campuses are safe for fundraising that happens during graduation. Clear the ground, make our donors feel safe. This is what policing is. This is why Senator Mary Washington in East Baltimore described the effort to create a private Hopkins police force as like putting and creating a Vatican City in the middle of Baltimore. A private police force, a private security force that only answers to the president and the board of trustees with public certified power to campus to police non-university affiliates. Through Hopkins, we can see how city schools can deploy the blunt force of campus police as a mechanism of what I call extraterritorial extraction, laying the ground for how residents will use and live in spaces to set the table for the campus to come. Managing the daily lives of everyday residents in the university interest in ways that protect campus wealth and set the table for the expansion on the horizon. But there are alternatives. There are other ways of doing campus. It's always Canada, right? And it ain't perfect. And it's not benevolent. It was driven by self-interest. In the 2010s, the campus of University of Winnipeg saw an explosion from 6,000 to 10,000 students in a 10-year span. But it wasn't the typical white students that came in the day and got the hell out before nightfall to the suburbs. It was what they call new Canadians, what we would call immigrant communities, and First Nations, because Manitoba, the province, has the biggest First Nations population in North America. And they were adults and they had children. And the university said, well, hell, we want to retain this new student body. But if we're going to do that, we have to do campus differently. So it wasn't benevolent. It was self-interested, but it was in a way that served the public good in a real way. What does this mean on the ground? This meant that the University of Winnipeg created this building here called University Downtown Commons. It is a housing development that has 4 different price points of housing. Premium rate, which is the 13 units with the balconies, market rate, affordable rate, and even more affordable rent geared to income. The 13 premium rate housing units help underwrite the rest of the building. And the only thing they have different is the balconies. Because to create affordable housing, like most affordable housing developments, the argument is that, well, poor people don't deserve good finishes and high quality building materials. But because the university has leverage with 10,000 students, they got the province to give them an exception so that except for the premium rate units, all the other units are interchangeable. You go into a unit, you don't know if you're in a market rate or a rent geared to income rate. They're all the same. And on top of that, for residents who can't afford unit-based Wi-Fi, there's free Wi-Fi in the common areas. And because the area, again, is primarily First Nations and New Canadians, The air duct system in the building has been retrofitted to allow for indigenous smudging practices in the common areas. This is a university development that allows not just students, but non-student residents to live in this building. A commons in the truest sense. Let's go to the community charter. If you don't know, Winnipeg is brick cold about 10 months out the year, right? So indoor facilities are at a high premium. So when University of Winnipeg built a recreational facility, they agreed to have it governed by a community charter. What does this mean? This means that in the prime hours of the day, so not 7 in the morning and 12 at midnight, community organizations have the right of use of that student campus recreational facility, and it's governed by an enforceable community charter. And then finally, food services. Who controls food services here? Is it one of the horrible multinationals, Aramark, Tedesco? Okay, but most schools are governed that way, where you're paying $16 for a chicken sandwich and French fries, right? Or approximately that. So Winnipeg had Aramark. The food was horrible. They fired them and created their own facility called Diversity Foods. On the labor side, they specifically focus on what they call difficult to employ residents, First Nations, New Canadians, LGBTQ+, single mothers, formerly incarcerated, and they're shifting from simply wages to profit sharing. On the production side, 70% of their raw materials comes from family farms within a 100-kilometer radius. Every workstation has a compost bin next to it. And they send their cooking oil out to be converted into biodiesel to run the campus. So my point here is that when I get people that look like me in the front with their arms crossed, with their suits on, they don't look as good as me, but when they sit in the front row, their arms crossed, saying, oh, academics, complain, critique. What are the solutions? These are the solutions. And using this as a model of inspiration, I built out my Smart Cities Research Lab to move from just simply information sharing, because when people read my book in the Shadow Abbey Tower, because it was readable, a young brother from Philadelphia that just came out of prison, he said, brother, you are telling my story. But we don't need you to just simply information share. We need you to get on the ground here and touch these streets. Advocate for us, work with us. And that changed the whole framework of the lab. It went from a polite university research facility to being a mercenary, militarized, weaponry-dominated framework to work on behalf of communities all across the country, right? If you call, we will come. And we have been coming and coming. So the research lab consults on best practices for building out equitable urban communities with a particular focus on university-driven development. Because we heard all across the country that residents are like, we like campuses, we like the university. We're not anti-university, but we just hate to know that when expansion comes, that's not for us. That means we gotta leave. So the mantra of the lab is the smartest cities develop without displacement. And we move with that ethos all over the country. So as we assess the national landscape, the lab concludes that collectively we must call for reparations from higher education's explicit role, not just in slavery, but in indigenous land seizures, Jim Crow segregation, urban renewal and eminent domain practices, and policing, weaponry on the ground. But we also call for payments in lieu of taxes. We call on schools to reserve a portion of their tax endowments for community projects and a transfer of investment to community service serving financial institutions. We call for university medical centers to honor their mandates of indigent care, that provides their tax exemption. We call on schools to attach a community benefits agreement to any campus expansions that can include affordable housing mandates, zip code specific jobs, because we know when they offer community benefits to the city, they somehow find the widest area of the city to help. So zip code specific mandates on job creation and job training, scholarships and public access to campus facilities governed by a community charter. We insist on the building out of community-based zoning and planning boards with enforcement powers for all higher education-related expansions and developments. And we insist that all campus developments be governed by a community charter. We watch schools throw away food daily and demand that they package the food into healthy meals for communities of need. Finally, we call to divest in campus police and then invest in what schools can actually do. Invest in teams of preventative outreach and trauma care, alongside the things that actually create public safety, housing security, and food security, and job security. So I'm almost done. How have we turned with the lab these ideas into practice? And we can talk about more detail in the Q&A. Some of the questions might bear these things out. But just briefly, I want you to see some of the things that we've been able to do. This is me in the lab working with New Haven Rising in New Haven, Connecticut. Just 2 years ago, we were able to bring Yale University to the table and force them to increase their pilots to the number of $52 million over the next 6 years, when for decades they knew they never had to come to the table. We had a ground game of door knocking, journalistic assault, organizing labor and residents and local city councilors to make them come to the table. Public art showing the small red line is the $13 million pilot they were paying. The long blue line going the length of the block is the $40 billion endowment of the university. We brought them to the table, and in a meager way, yes, but we won. We reset the table. From that, folks all over the country, including with us, for us, how can we have another New Haven? Pilot campaigns we've been working on everywhere from Mass and Rhode Island to, yes, with Baltimore and Ithaca and Durham and the Bay Area and Miami and St. Louis. The list is going on and on and on. We just created this thing called the Renewal Project. We'll talk about it in more detail in the Q&A. But all these folks are talking about, yeah, universities are slavery. After years of never wanting to admit that universities across the country were built on slavery, all of a sudden, oh, discovery, they were. Yes, dummy, yeah, we know they were. Community historians with plastic bags of mimeographed papers been going around the community saying it for decades. You know those Black community historians carrying the receipts, being ignored. But then after doing calculations, they said, okay, yeah, we can say that we had a hand in slavery. But look who we are today. Let's pat ourselves in the back. Look how far we've come. I said, hold up, wait a minute. You have a hand of harm in the 20th century too. You were the friendly face of urban renewal started in the 1950s under the Housing Act of 49 and 54, and even in the recent present in 2004 in Baltimore. So we created this thing called the Renewal Project with teams all across the country, in New Haven, in Philly, in St. Louis, in Denver, in Madison, Wisconsin, in Athens, Georgia, to engage in a four-pronged attack of research, curriculum development, creative placemaking, and yes, reparations. We're building this out right now. The first line of attack in that was that for years, Philadelphia, and particularly its UniverCity neighborhood, right, University City neighborhood, where Penn and Drexel are and the hospitals are, have been encouraging pharmaceutical and tech and biotech development. We uncovered from the 69 occupation of students' residence when University City was coming online. They forced the university to the table to agree to scattered site housing in these darker areas, scattered site affordable housing. That was the agreement. That promise was broken. So we uncovered this planning map and brought it to the attention of councilperson Jamie Gauthier. She used this history, historians, she used this history, this archival document, to build out an affordable housing overlay pilot in the development area. Real estate interests were pissed. It was a powerful yet modest victory. Then we found out, or investigative journalists found out in Virginia about this neighborhood that once existed in Norfolk called Shoe Lane, a middle-class Black community that was demolished to make way for a university, Newport News, Virginia. Christopher Newport University. That the story we have been telling was yes, it happened all over the country. So these investigative journalists at ProPublica, they saw this, they wanted to tell that local story, but for the grace of God, somebody said, well, is this only a one-time thing? Or is this a national story? And they said, and residents said, and local activists said, you got to talk to Davarian Baldwin and the Renewal Project. So they had the good sense to come talk to us. We situated this local story of Shoe Lane into a national narrative. We got the story picked up by Essence Magazine. We got the story turned into a documentary called Uprooted. You can watch it on YouTube today. But even more importantly, the story was read and watched by state legislature Dolores McQuinn. She picked it up, and she now has created a commission to study the history of universities demolishing Black neighborhoods in the state of Virginia in the call for reparations for the aggrieved families. This is what history, research, nerdy things can do. This is what we can do, people. You understand what I'm saying? This is what we can, this is what we are doing. Right? So with this in mind, above all, we must discard the dated myth of higher education as a schoolhouse. Oh, we just teach classes and conduct peer research. The quaint notion of the Ivy Tower is dead. Colleges and universities sit at the center of today's central knowledge economy, now driving our cities. It's schools that set our wage ceiling. It is schools that shape our land values. It's schools that set the terms of urban governance. And it's schools that set the priorities of our policing systems. And because of the rise of UniverCities as the new planning model, campuses have become the sites of much broader struggles, as we see right now, over neighborhood displacement, living wages, IP rights, universal health care, wealth redistribution, policing abolition, and militarized foreign policy. Higher education is no longer just academic. No longer is higher education simply a training ground for the so-called real world. We see that is now a crucial staging ground for the complete and total transformation of our shared urban futures. Thank you.
We have just a few minutes, very tight Q&A session, because we're a little bit short on time, maybe 2, at most 3 questions. We only ask, first of all, you to come to the microphone, just to accommodate everyone. Don't be intimidated.
Yeah.
But the big request is, 1, make it brief, and 2, make it a question.
Right.
Those are big asks.
And I'll be here afterwards too.
And
I'll
by
be
the
here.
way, if you're here from one of my classes, remember there's a sign-in sheet in the back, but we have a reception afterwards. So there's also
Yeah.
opportunities to talk with Professor Baldwin, because he's going to be signing books and whatnot. So
Yeah. Thank you. Please come to the mic. Thank you. Hey.
Hi,
Peace.
so you mentioned WUFU a few times, so I'm assuming that you've had a chance to read the legislation or maybe provide some input.
Read what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first thing you said.
The legislation that's backing the
We
WUFU
worked together.
solution. Okay,
Yes, they reached out to me.
so with that in
early.
mind, do you think that the WUFU legislation as written hits the mark in shifting the power dynamics between Black butterfly residents and extractive meds and eds?
Yeah.
And if not, what improvements would you recommend to make the WUFU legislation stronger before it reaches the mayor's desk? I'm specifically wondering about how the allocation and appointment of seats on the steering committee ensures that Black Butterfly residents have a meaningful seat at the table when only 2 seats are reserved for low-income residents, most of whom are neither union members nor worker owners in a cooperative.
So number one, yes, that should be addressed. Number two, pilots are these tricky things. They are the thing that most Americans, I pay my taxes, right? Homeowner populism. They can acknowledge and see that makes sense. But what we see is that once a pilot is made and paid, it allows universities to go on engaging in business as usual. So what I've actually argued for at a national level is that pilots be tied to some kind of trigger that extends beyond the use of the university. So like, for example, if you actually engage in lifelong community engagement on an annual level, then you can reduce your pilot contributions. If you do not invest in the community, your pilot contributions should increase. Something that can continue to keep the universities, medical schools at the table versus simply paying one time and going about doing business as usual. But then the steering committees, as you mentioned before, should be democratic. There should be labor involved. There should be working class people involved. Yes to all those things. But the point here is that pilots are not an answer of end all to be all into themselves. They are a start. What they should be is a trigger to begin getting into the books and the spreadsheets and the economic infrastructure of how universities actually work. They are a wedge to make visible the central role that higher education plays in our political economy. They are not a solution, they are a provocation. And we cannot see them as simply answers unto themselves. Am I saying they shouldn't be done? No, but they are not an answer unto themselves. Thanks for your question. Yes, that's the point to have the conversation. Yes.
So my question is, as a resident that lives in the footprint of University of Maryland, we have an organization that has 7 anchor institution reps, 4 of which are with University of Maryland, Medical Campus, Wexford, BioPark, and University. We have this perception from a lot of residents and resident reps that they benefit us, and we don't really keep them accountable. And I am a board member as a resident of that organization, and they recently agreed to hire an executive director that is a real estate professional. And when we ask questions as board members about their, like how do they involve community, this person actually doesn't have a lot of experience with engaging in the community, and I don't think he believes in that community. But anyways, but then we have this tension between this idea of like benefit and what they're doing. But in the meantime, these anchor reps are just happy to actually be, I don't know, just somehow pretending that they are actually benefiting, and they have a lot of seats at the table. So how can we help our residents, our leaders, to actually understand these dynamics that you just shared?
Well, I'm gonna tell you, Wexford, they hate to see me coming. Because what they bank on is that local residents are isolated in their knowledge and understanding about this individual development, so they're thankful. But what I have been able to do, so when they began to build out UCity Square in Philadelphia, I had just come back from Miami Converge they built, and they had reached an agreement to allow for nonprofits to exist on the ground floor of Miami Converge, not for free, at market rate, right? So it wasn't a benefit. It wasn't a gift, just simply the right to be in Overtown. If you don't know about, that's the hood, right? In near Liberty City, in South Florida. So, but they were offering all these things in Philadelphia. But because I just come from Miami, I say, hold up. How are you are being evaluated right now, not based on what you say in Philadelphia, but how you treat our comrades and colleagues in Miami. What you do in Miami dictates how we will deal with you in Philadelphia. So the point is that we must mirror and match vision and understanding of their global footprint or national footprint and match it with community power. But also on top of that, this is why I call for higher education or mez and eds divisions in citywide planning and zoning board offices. And that there must be not just simply advisory boards, but boards that have specific oversight, the ability to veto and stop a project if it doesn't actually meet community benefits. I will be happy to talk to you after the conversation. If you would like me to come back and have this conversation, I probably know the people that are on the other side of the table, and we could have a fun time.
The issue of the issue of endowments,
Yeah.
as well as military contracts.
Yeah.
For example, Johns Hopkins has a $10 billion multi-year contract with the Defense Department to help develop weapons. I was wondering if you'd expand a little bit about that, because that's been on people's minds.
Right.
And talk a little more about like the role that private university police can play, because in the case of Hopkins, the Baltimore Police Department announced they were not willing to clear the encampment in like a mile north of here, and Hopkins didn't have the manpower to do it in their private police force.
Which is what they're calling an increase in private police. But yeah, so I've been getting inundated with questions and calls from news outlets about, okay, what are these things, these endowments? Because it is to the grace of students, activists are saying we need to divest from university endowment investments in Israel and military defense contracts that are sending weapons to Israel and to Congo and to Haiti and to Eastern Europe. So people are always like, what is an endowment? What's this divestment thing talking about? Because it goes back to the history of the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s. And the fact that some of the most powerful ways in which we were able to defeat apartheid from the US arm of that struggle was when students at places like University of California, Berkeley did a forensic accounting of how the California system was investing in South Africa to the tune of $3 billion and forced the university to divest from those investments. And that was a huge plank in shutting down apartheid South Africa, or turning the tide, to the point that when Nelson Mandela came to the Bay Area, he specifically cited the divestment campaign as a critical plank in the global fulcrum to win against the apartheid movement. And so now there's a referendum on university endowments all across the country to beg the question, what are your investments? Where are they going? What are they underwriting? And what are you doing in our name? And we know, my own son attends an elite liberal arts college called Bowdoin College in Maine. And he's part of the movement to reconsider the endowments. And we had just a call this last night. He said the administrators are telling us, yeah, we can divest, but then that's going to have an impact on your student services, right? That's the Faustian bargain. So that's what you want to do. We can. Wait a minute. Do not fall for the banana in the tailpipe, right? The point here is that schools have been divesting from Israel since 2009, Hampshire College. But in the small liberal arts world, Wesleyan and Occidental and all have 2014, Tufts, 2017, 2019. There are a whole host of other investments that universities can make and recreate their portfolio that actually might give a greater return. Don't let them tell you that it's either we invest in military buildup or you have to lose student services. That's the new trick. So we need to be aware. I know I probably didn't answer all your questions. Okay, policing. Yes, so the point here is that, and this is the trick, if it's a private police force like Hopkins or Yale, not only are they be given jurisdiction over blocks beyond the campus, Yale PD has jurisdiction over the entire city of New Haven. Chicago PD has jurisdiction wherever there is a new building being speculated, not even built. But on top of that, private universities are FOIA exempt. Freedom of Information Act. They are exempt. And so if that university has a private police force with the power and jurisdiction to police non-residents, you have public power, right? A private police force with public power and no public oversight. Except for recently in the state of Indiana. They overturned the FOIA exemptions of private universities, but everywhere else in the country, if you're a private university with a private police force, you have public power with no public oversight. This is the one thing that Mary Washington pointed out in East Baltimore and what she meant by a Vatican City in the middle of Baltimore. This is the story, right? So all of this power is coming from public authority. The state charter, the tax exemptions, the indication that graduate workers are apprentices and not workers. All these things create a cluster of wealth extraction that's not coming from the brilliance and the innovation of the institution on itself. It's coming from the exact extraction of public dollars for the interest of either private or public self-interest universities. You are underwriting and paying for the very wealth that you're being told to be lucky for it to be in your backyard. It wouldn't be here without your taxes. It wouldn't be here without your reduced labor, your suppressed wages. It wouldn't be here without you not being able to have access to the health services that come with the tax abatement of medical centers. Make these institutions good neighbors, because these are your spaces, public and private. I'll end on that. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna have some book signing. Get out the door.
Yeah.
Out there. Thank you guys so much for coming. There's food outside.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we have to get some canned dinner at my PM. Thanks a lot.
Very good. Yeah.
Easily be very bright. That's like not much sense, but it's skill. That's skill. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. So I saw something. Yeah. Right. Did you cut the government? Yeah.